This is a 2014 Range Rover autobiography, bought from Copart, broken and full of unknowns. 4.4 liters of diesel V8 power, but it came with a price and problems. Let's tear it down and bring it back to life. Autobiography cost me just £5,500 at Copart, but of course, it came with mechanical issues. Under the hood, a 4.4 liter V8 diesel worth £4,000 alone. Fully loaded inside, panoramic roof, massage seats, ambient lights, but it needs love and probably a lot of money. Is it a deal or a disaster? You tell me. Subscribe if you want to see the rebuild. Today I'm stripping down the front end of this 2014 Range Rover 4.4 SDV8. It's not just a bumper job, it's a puzzle. First things first, battery off. No sparks, no surprises. Next, we remove the under tray and wheel arch liners. Expect lots of plastic clips. And yes, some will break. There are hidden torque screws under the headlights and behind the grille. Be patient. This isn't a job to rush. Don't forget the wiring. Headlight washers, fog lights, parking sensors, all need to be unplugged before the bumper comes off. Before you disconnect anything, grab a small bucket or rag. These hoses will drain washer fluid the moment you unplug them. Here's a small plastic clip or squeeze connector at the base of the hose. Gently press the sides and pull the hose off the jet or pump. If you want to avoid more leaks, plug the hose temporarily with a plastic cap or even a bolt and some tape. Then comes the heavy part. Literally, this bumper's no joke. Get help or risk damage. With the bumper gone, the headlights come out easy. Just a few bolts and connectors. And there it is. Stripped and ready for deeper work. Radiator, engine, whatever comes next. Hit subscribe if you want to see what's hiding behind this V8 monster. Here are typically 3 Torx bolts securing the headlight. One on top, one on the inner side, and one underneath. Use a T30 Torx bit. Be gentle. These bolts go into plastic mounts and can strip easily. Unplug the main connector by pressing the release tab and pulling straight out. With the bumper and headlights out, it's time to strip the core front structure to reach the engine. Start with the crash bar, held by 4 to 6 bolts into the chassis legs. Use a breaker bar if they're tight. Be careful. It's heavy and may have wiring or sensors clipped to it. Next up is the radiator pack. Disconnect all hoses, coolant lines, transmission cooler lines and intercooler pipes. Drain the coolant from the lower radiator hose. Unplug radiator fan connector and temp sensor wiring. Disconnect AC lines. Requires degassing by a certified technician. Remove mounting brackets or bolts holding the entire cooling frame. Once all connections are clear, the whole unit can be lifted or pulled forward, giving you full access to the engine. If you want complete access from the front, remove the radiator support frame itself. It's usually bolted to the inner wings and chassis legs. Label all hoses and connectors for reinstallation. If AC lines are involved, discharge the system professionally. Watch out for fluid spills. Have trays and absorbent cloths ready. Disconnect fuel lines, vacuum hoses, turbo pipes, intake and exhaust connections. Remove the prop shaft and front differential if access is blocked. Unbolt engine mounts and gearbox cross members. Support the engine with a hoist. Double check that all connections are detached. Carefully lift the engine out from the front. Expect tight clearance. Remove as much as possible for space. Use a load leveler for balance during lifting. This is the old engine in a 4.4 SDV8 diesel. It served well, but something went very wrong. The turbocharger failed catastrophically. The compressor wheel shattered. Metal fragments were sucked into the intake, damaging the engine internally. That's what killed it, and now we're tearing it all down to rebuild or replace. Time to install the new 4.4 SDV8 engine, and it starts from the bottom. Using the engine hoist, lower the engine slowly into the bay, guiding it between the chassis rails. Line up the engine mount brackets with the rubber mounts, pern on each chassis leg. These are your main supports. Insert and hand tighten the mounting bolts first. Make sure the engine is seated properly, no twisting or misalignment. Before final tightening, check clearances around the firewall, transmission and front subframe. Once it's all sitting right, torque the mount bolts to factory spec, and your engine is locked in place. Use a load leveler for easier engine positioning. Don't forget to reconnect ground straps near the mounts. If the mounts are old or soft, consider replacing them now. Access is easiest at this stage. The starter mounts to the side of the transmission bell housing near the flywheel. Usually accessible from under the car, some models may require removing the heat shield. Slide the starter into place, aligning the pinion gear with the flywheel housing. Usually 2 or 3 main bolts, E-torques or hex bolts. Hand tighten the mounting bolts first, then torque them to spec, around 40 to 50 Newton meters, depending on the bolt size. Secure the thick battery cable to the large terminal using a 13mm nut. Ensure it's tight. Connect the small spade or clip-on wire. This sends the start signal from the ignition. Make sure all cables are tight and clear of moving parts or heat sources. Tips and warnings. Always disconnect the battery before installing the starter. Don't over-tighten the signal wire terminal, it's fragile. If engine and gearbox are separated, install the starter after they are mated together. And big thanks to Ivan Garage for supporting me all the way through this build. Couldn't have done it without you. Now it's time to install the gearbox, one of the final and most critical steps in the rebuild. Start by making sure the engine and bell housing surfaces are clean and free of debris. If removed, reinstall the flex plate on the engine and torque it to spec. Check that the torque converter is fully seated into the transmission. You should hear 2 to 3 clicks as it locks into the pump. Using a transmission jack or lift, carefully raise the gearbox under the car and align it with the engine. Make sure the torque converter stays in place. Don't let it slide forward. Hand thread the bell housing bolts first, then torque them in a star pattern to ensure even fitment. Usually 8 to 10 bolts around the housing. Once the bell housing is bolted up, rotate the crankshaft to align the flex plate holes with the torque converter studs. Install and torque the converter nuts through the starter or inspection port. Lower the gearbox slightly onto its mount and bolt the crossmember back to the chassis. Plug in the transmission control connector, reattach breather hoses and reconnect the cooler lines. Once everything is in place, fill the gearbox with fresh fluid following the factory fill and level procedure. Tips: always double check torque converter depth before mating to engine. Don't force the gearbox. If it doesn't slide in, something's misaligned. Use Loctite on torque converter nuts and torque to spec. With the gearbox in, we're one step closer to hearing this V8 come back to life.
erau. Parcă-s ele, dar nu știu. Nu cred. Două, dar nu-s patru. Mai duc și mai aduc și mai iau. Piesa masă. Am transpirat, nu se iubate. Corpizat. Da, aici am funcționat. S-o frântitat? Da, este 10, cu 10 asta e masa cu ruc. Poți fi curățat și eu? Este. Strâns, este. Și mai lung loc. Poate aici?
Now that the transmission is in place, it's time to reconnect the Quattro-style AWD system. Start by bolting the transfer case to the rear of the gearbox. Align the splines, tighten all bolts evenly. Slide the front prop shaft into the front output flange of the transfer case and bolt it to the front differential. Use new bolts if possible and torque to spec, usually around 40 to 50 Newton meters. Mark the shaft orientation if reusing the old one to maintain balance. Next, align the rear prop shaft with the output flange of the transfer case and connect it to the rear diff. Double check that the U-joints are seated properly and nothing binds. Reinstall any underbody braces, shields or exhaust brackets that were removed to access the drivetrain. Spin the prop shafts by hand. Check for smooth rotation and no resistance. Check for any loose bolts, missing clips or misaligned joints. The B+ terminal is the large threaded post on the back of the starter motor. 2. Prepare the cable. Take the thick red cable coming from the battery or starter relay. This is your main power line. Make sure the battery is disconnected before working here. 3. Slide the cable onto the stud. Place the ring terminal of the cable onto the B+ stud. 4. Secure with nut. Tighten the securing nut using a 13mm socket or wrench. Not too tight but firm. You don't want it vibrating loose. 5. Install the protective cap. Cover the terminal with the rubber or plastic protective boot to prevent accidental shorts. Lay out all the exhaust components. Downpipes, DPFs, center pipes and rear boxes. Check all gaskets, clamps and rubber mounts. Start at the turbos. Position the downpipes and loosely bolt them to the turbo outlets. Don't tighten fully yet. You'll need play for alignment. Connect the DPFs or catalytic converters to the downpipes. Slide in the gaskets and align the flanges. Use new exhaust gaskets and ensure sensor wires. NOx, temperature. Next, install the center pipes. Hang them in the rubber exhaust mounts under the chassis and connect to the DPFs using clamps or bolts. Finally, slide the rear mufflers into place. Align the tailpipes with the bumper and tighten the clamps. Once the system is aligned and hanging freely with no tension, tighten all bolts and clamps from front to back. Plug in all exhaust sensors, especially the DPF temp sensors, pressure lines and oxygen sensors. Tips: use anti-seize on all bolts and threads. Replace any cracked rubber hangers or worn gaskets. Don't over-tighten clamps. This can distort the pipes. Leave tailpipes slightly adjustable until final alignment is perfect. Exhaust is on. Now all that's left. Now that the engine is in, it's time to reinstall the radiator and reconnect all vital systems. Attach the upper and lower radiator hoses to the engine. Make sure clamps are tight and correctly positioned. Reconnect the electric fan connector and the coolant temperature sensor. These usually clip in easily with locking tabs. Reconnect the high-pressure fuel lines to the rails and pump, tighten with care, then plug in the quick connect low-pressure feed and return lines. Always double-check for leaks after priming. Plug in the crankshaft sensor, camshaft sensors, MAF, MAP, and intake air temperature sensors. Most have unique connectors. You can't mix them up. Secure any loose wiring with clips or cable ties, keep them away from heat. Top up coolant, prime the fuel system, and check for leaks before first crank. And that wraps up part 1 of the Range Rover rebuild. Engine in, systems reconnected, and we're getting close to first ignition.
Today we may give the Range Rover its first start, top upping all fluids, checking all sensors.
We started with the sensors: camshaft, crankshaft, map sensor, coolant temperature, intake air. One by one, every connector went back in place. Next came the radiator pack. We mounted the radiator, intercooler, condenser and fan shroud back as a unit. Reconnected all coolant hoses, top, bottom, heater core return, dega pipe, and tightened every clamp. Then we filled it with fresh coolant ready to bleed later. Each cable was routed properly and clipped in to avoid rubbing or heat exposure. No shortcuts here. The intake system went back in, along with fresh O-rings, intercooler pipes, and sensor plugs. Fuel lines were locked in, high pressure and return lines tight, no leaks. Once all mechanical components were in place, it was time to reassemble the front end. We started with the inner structure, refitting the headlight brackets and support panels that hold everything together. Next, we clipped the moldings and trims back onto the fenders and bumper. Some of the clips had to be replaced, especially the ones that broke during disassembly. With the brackets aligned, we mounted the headlights, adjusted the position for proper leveling, then moved on to the front bumper. We reinstalled the metal support panels behind the bumper, the ones that connect the radiator frame to the chassis rails. These panels serve as the mounting points for the headlight brackets, and they also keep the front end aligned during driving. After securing them with the original bolts, we checked the alignment on both sides to ensure the front frame was straight. If they're even slightly off, the bumper and headlights won't fit correctly. Then we mounted the headlight brackets, making sure they sat flush with the fender edges and locked in without stress on the plastic clips. This part is critical. These brackets not only hold the headlights but also determine the visual line of the front end. The bumper slid in with no resistance. Always a good sign that the structure underneath is straight. Bolts went in clean, everything lined up perfectly. After tightening all fasteners and checking panel gaps, the intake system went back in next, but not before a full inspection and cleanup. We cleaned the intake pipes and throttle body, removing carbon deposits and old gasket residue to ensure a tight seal. Fresh O-rings were installed on all connectors and sensor ports. These small parts are critical. One bad seal and the whole system loses pressure. Then came the intercooler pipes. We double-checked each joint for cracks or wear and made sure the inner surfaces were clean. Each pipe was pushed in firmly and clamped with high tension bands to prevent boost leaks under load. Once the intake system was in place, we reinstalled the upper frame braces and cross supports. Finally, it was time to give the engine what it truly needs: clean fluids and brand new filters. While the oil drained, we removed the oil filter housing, located at the top of the engine between the V-banks. Using a 32mm socket, we unscrewed the cap and pulled out the old filter cartridge. The rubber O-ring on the housing was replaced with a new one, lightly oiled, and the new filter snapped into place before torquing the cap back on. The structural elements that tie the front end together. These frames add rigidity, especially under torque when the engine twists. Without them, the front end flexes and panels can misalign. Once drained, we replaced the drain plug washer, tightened it to spec, and poured in fresh 5W30 fully synthetic oil, just under 8 liters. Next, the air filters. This engine uses two, one on each side. We unclipped the airbox covers, removed the old filters, and vacuumed any debris inside the boxes. New filters went in with the airflow arrow facing the right direction, and the covers clipped back securely. It's a simple step, but it makes a big difference in performance and fuel economy. Inside, we removed the cabin filter from the passenger footwell, dropped the cover panel, slid out the old dusty filter, and replaced it with a new activated carbon filter. Battery connected, fluid stopped, ignition on.
First try just like that. Unbelievable. Move like Swiss watch.
Man, I didn't expect that, not this smooth. No lights, no codes, no weird sounds, just perfect. And it fired up. First try, clean, smooth, like it had never been touched. No smoke, no stutter, just a deep, steady diesel growl, the kind that hits you in the chest. I smiled, I froze, I just stood there and listened. That sound, that moment, made everything worth it. After that first start, the excitement was real. But now came the serious part, checking everything. I let the engine idle for a few minutes. No revving, just letting it settle into its rhythm. I kept an eye on the RPMs, temperature gauge, and listened carefully for knocks, ticks, or vibrations. While the engine ran, I checked underneath for leaks, oil. I inspected every hose connection, every clamp around the turbo, intercooler pipes, and especially the fuel rail. A fresh rebuild can sweat, so even the smallest leak needs attention. I made sure all the hose clamps were tight and the drain plug was sealed. The coolant reservoir cap was removed, and I used a proper 50-50 mix of OEM approved coolant and distilled water. I slowly poured coolant into the expansion tank, watching the level rise. I took my time to avoid trapping air in the system. When the tank was nearly full, I gently squeezed the upper radiator hose a few times. That helped burp out air pockets manually. With the cap still off, I started the engine and let it idle. The heater was turned on full hot, with the blower at max, to open the heater core circuit. As the engine warmed up, coolant started circulating. I kept topping up the reservoir as the level dropped. Around 80 to 90 degrees Celsius, the thermostat opened. I saw the lower radiator hose start to warm up. That's the sign coolant is flowing through the full system. Air bubbles surfaced in the tank. I waited until they stopped. Once the bubbling stopped and the level stabilized, I sealed the cap back on. Then I checked underneath for leaks, hoses, radiator seams, pump housing, and heater lines. After shutoff and cool down, I rechecked the coolant level, topped off slightly if needed. The system was now sealed, bled, and ready for the road. Always use approved coolant. Never mix unknown types. Never rev the engine during bleeding. It can trap air. If possible, use a vacuum bleeder tool for faster, cleaner results. Everything was ready. Fluids topped, engine warm, no errors. We were just minutes away from the test drive. But as the engine reached temperature, things took a turn. Coolant started gushing out. Not a drip, not a leak. A full-on spill across the floor. It was coming from underneath and fast. I shut the engine off immediately and crawled under the car. There it was, the radiator drain plug, completely failing to hold pressure. The cap was done, old, brittle, cracked. Coolant was shooting out from the seal in every direction. So I had to stop everything, drain what was left, replace the faulty plug with a new one, and go through the entire refill and bleeding process again, from scratch. Not the ending I expected for that day, but that's how it goes sometimes. Lesson learned, never trust an old drain cap. After the coolant disaster, I drained the system, installed a brand new radiator drain plug, and carefully repeated the entire refill and bleeding process. With everything sealed tight, I reassembled the front end, bumper, trims, headlight alignment, all buttoned up and looking clean. At last, it was ready for a proper test drive, or so I thought. The engine ran fine, temps were stable, but the car just didn't pull like it should. The power was weak, throttle response sluggish. Something was holding it back. So I hooked up the scanner. And there it was, high DPF back pressure. The diesel particulate filter was clogged, completely choked up. No real test drive could happen until that was dealt with. Next step, full DPF cleaning, sensor checks, and a forced regeneration. Only then can we take this build out on the open road. Part 2 ends here, engines in but not yet unleashed. Part 3 is coming up, where we clean the lungs of this beast and finally stretch its legs. Part 2 ends here. The engine is installed, the systems are in place, but the soul of the car still isn't free. The DPF is clogged, the power's restrained, and before we can truly drive it, we need to let it breathe. But while the Rover waits, I'm taking a different kind of drive, more exactly, Polpero. A tiny fishing village tucked into the cliffs, where the roads are barely wide enough for one car, and the sea feels like it's just a step away from your door. No tourist buses, no noise, just narrow stone paths, salt in the air, and time moving slow. It's the kind of place that reminds you why we build, why we drive, and why sometimes we need to pause. So while the diesel V8 waits for its final breath of clean air, I'm off to clear my own head by the sea. Part 3 is coming, the real test drive, the full regeneration, and maybe the beginning of something bigger. One more fix, one final test, one hell of a drive. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in part 3. On another day, I switched focus to the Range Rover project.
You swap the engine, everything boots up, you fire it up, and then it hits you. Restricted performance. Just 2 words, but they ruin everything. No boost, no power, and no clue what went wrong. We pulled it onto the ramp and started troubleshooting. We focused on the turbo actuator, but before we could even touch it, we had to get access. To do that, we started by removing the large plastic cover located underneath the front bumper. Then, we had to unbolt the front stabilizer support bar. That metal brace was blocking direct access to the actuator. Next, we disconnected the vacuum hose from the actuator to ensure it wouldn't get damaged during removal and to allow us to manually test actuator travel freely. Hold the connector or pipe firmly and gently twist the hose back and forth to break the seal. Once it loosens, pull it straight off. Do not force it, especially on plastic fittings, they crack easily. If stuck, apply a few drops of WD-40 around the base and wait a minute. Locate the bolts or screws securing the part. Use the right size and type to avoid stripping. Apply slow controlled torque, don't jerk it. Once loose, continue turning by hand or with a ratchet. Store the bolts in a tray or container so you don't lose them. We unscrewed the 4 bolts holding the front stabilizer support bar. Used a 13mm socket with a ratchet. Clean with a wire brush if needed. If the bolt is worn or rounded, replace it, especially in critical areas. By the way, the lower control arms were already replaced earlier, so we are not touching them in this job. Only after clearing all that could we begin the actual work. Once exposed, we removed the actuator and cleaned the mechanism thoroughly. We connected the pressure pump to the actuator nipple, pumped it up to 1 bar and waited. But something felt off. The actuator arm wasn't moving smoothly, it was jerky and hesitating. That's when we knew it wasn't just about pressure. We removed the actuator completely, cleaned all the carbon and dirt buildup, and replaced it with a tested unit. Use a brush and brake cleaner or carb cleaner to remove oil, carbon and dirt from the outer housing. Wipe it with a clean rag or compressed air. Use a small wire brush or fine sandpaper if needed around the pivot and mounting points to remove rust or buildup. Spray again with cleaner to flush out any loosened debris. Reapply penetrating oil for smooth motion. This time we connected the pump again, brought it up to 1 bar and held it for 30 seconds. The arm moved silky smooth and the needle held steady, no pressure drop. That confirmed the diaphragm was healthy and there were no internal leaks. Years of grime and soot were affecting its movement. Then we manually tested how smoothly the actuator arm moved, ensuring there was no resistance or sticking when releasing vacuum pressure. Once we confirmed it was moving freely, we reinstalled it, reconnected the hose and moved to the next step. Align the actuator exactly in its original position on the mounting bracket. Make sure the actuator arm is seated properly on the turbo lever or replication without forcing it. Insert and hand tighten all mounting bolts to avoid cross-threading. Then torque them down evenly using a ratchet or torque wrench if spec is known. Ensure the actuator sits flush and is firmly secured. Slide the hose back onto the actuator nipple. Refit the clamp, spring or screw type to secure it tightly. Check the hose for cracks or looseness, replace if necessary. Stabilizer support bar. Position it and tighten all bolts securely. plastic under tray skid plate. Align with clips and reinstall screws or fasteners. Ensure nothing is loose or left behind under the vehicle. Double check all connections, actuator bolts, vacuum lines, brackets. Look for any leftover tools, rags or parts. Visually confirm that all components are correctly aligned and secured. Using the launch diagnostic tool, we performed the full actuator calibration, forcing it to learn its correct open-close positions in real time. Then we went into the ECU and cleared all stored fault codes, including those for boost pressure, turbo response and DPF signals. Followed that up with a complete adaptation reset. This tells the car to relearn airflow, turbo behavior, EGR cycles and more, all based on the new engine and cleaned components. After we finished working on the turbo actuator, it was time to put everything back together, starting with the front stabilizer bar. We carefully positioned the bar back into place under the subframe, making sure both ends were aligned properly with the stabilizer links. Then we mounted the support brackets over the bushings and started threading the bolts by hand to avoid cross-threading. Once everything was lined up, we tightened the bolts gradually and evenly on both sides. Securing the bar firmly in place, we made sure the bushings were seated correctly and not overly compressed. If the stabilizer links were disconnected, we also reattached them to the lower control arms, holding the shaft with an Allen key while tightening the nuts. After completing all the mechanical work, from cleaning the turbo actuator to reconnecting vacuum lines, the final and most important step was performing a system reset and calibration. We connected the diagnostic tool, in our case the launch scanner, to the OBD port. The first thing we did was clear all stored fault codes from the engine control unit. This removes any lingering warnings or old errors that could keep the system in limp mode. Then we ran a turbo actuator calibration. This procedure forces the ECU to relearn the open and closed positions of the actuator, ensuring precise boost control. If this step is skipped, even perfectly working actuator might behave unpredictably. Next, we performed a full adaptation reset. This tells the car to forget old parameters like fuel trims, airflow behavior, EGR cycles, and rebuild them based on the new, clean state of the engine and sensors. It's especially important after an engine swap or DPF regeneration. Once everything was reset, we restarted the engine and watched closely. No warning lights, no restricted performance message, and during the test drive, the throttle response was smooth, and the turbo kicked in exactly when it should. At this point, the system was fully recalibrated and running like it should. After the actuator calibration and TCU reset were completed, we moved on to the next critical step, the DPF regeneration. Since the diesel particulate filter was partially clogged, we used the diagnostic tool to trigger a forced regen. The idle increased slightly, the cooling fans kicked in, and we could feel the engine working to raise exhaust temperatures. To support the process, we went out for a steady test drive, keeping RPMs above 2000, avoiding stop-and-go traffic and maintaining consistent throttle. We stayed mostly in third and fourth gear to cut the regeneration complete efficiently. The particle filter soot mass is gradually decreasing. It's now down to 18 or just 15 grams and still dropping. And now it's at 17.25 grams. The regeneration is clearly working. And somewhere around the midpoint of the drive, after a long day under the car, I decided to enjoy one of the perks of driving a Range Rover. I turned on seat ventilation and adjusted the massage function to a higher level. Let's just say, if you're going to regenerate a DPF, this is the way to do it, in comfort. Regeneration mode for the DPF and relaxation mode for me. That's teamwork. One thing I love about this Range Rover, explaining split screen display. I can monitor the DPF region on one side and still have the map or music running on the other. Simple but smart. After about 25 minutes, the regeneration cycle completed successfully. The idle returned to normal, the fan shut off, and the scanner confirmed soot levels were back within spec. With that done, no more errors, no more Limp mode, just smooth, full power and a clean system.
If this helped you understand what's really behind restricted performance and how to fix it step by step, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below if you've faced similar issues with your Range Rover. More real repairs, real tools and real road tests coming soon, right here on John Auto Fix Studio.